millionaire discovered that his son's secret teacher was the maid's daughter, and what he did next left everyone speechless. At just 12 years old, Clara lived two lives. One in a cramped apartment, where unpaid medical bills from her father's death piled higher each month, and another inside a mansion she could never call home. She was the maid's daughter, trained to be invisible, to never be seen or heard. Yet Clara carried a secret, a gift that could transform the life of the millionaire's failing son. She risked everything to share it. But when his powerful father discovered the truth, their lives would never be the same. A 12-year-old girl polished a silver frame she could never afford. She wasn't just the maid's daughter. She was the silent keeper of a secret that could save a life. But that same secret could also destroy everything her mother had worked for. Clara traced the edge of the photograph with her dust cloth. Inside the sterling silver frame, the Harrison family smiled. Mr. Harrison stood tall, his expression severe even in a posed picture. Mrs. Harrison was gone now, a ghost in a beautiful dress. And their son, Ethan, stood beside them, his eyes looking somewhere far away. Clara's own reflection was a faint shimmer on the glass. A girl with pale blonde hair and eyes that saw too much. She didn't belong here, inside this life. She was just a part of the background, like the hum of the air conditioner or the scent of lemon polish. Her mother, Helen, worked with a quiet, tireless rhythm in the next room. The gentle swish of a mop on marble floors was the soundtrack to Clara's life. They were a team. Helen cleaned, and Clara dusted. Helen scrubbed, and Clara polished. They moved through the grand Harrison mansion like ghosts, leaving everything sparkling in their wake. Their real life was miles away, in a small apartment where the walls were thin and a stack of white envelopes sat on the kitchen table. Each envelope was a reminder of the doctors, the tests, the medicine. Each one was a weight on her mother's tired shoulders. The debt was a quiet monster that ate their food before they could and stole the sleep from her mother's eyes. This job was their lifeline. Mr. Harrison paid well. He was a hard man, a man who had built an empire from nothing. He expected perfection in his business and in his home. A single smudge on a window could mean a sharp word. A broken vase could mean dismissal. Helen told Clara every morning, "Keep your head down. Do your work. Don't be seen and don't be heard." Clara was good at being invisible. She had learned to walk without making a sound. She learned to watch the world from the corners of her eyes. She saw everything. She saw the sadness in the cook's face when she spoke of her son overseas. She saw the fake smiles the gardeners gave Mr. Harrison. And most of all, she saw Ethan. Ethan Harrison was 12, just like her. But his world was made of private tutors, expensive gadgets, and the heavy weight of his father's expectations. Clara often saw him in the mansion's vast library, a room bigger than their entire apartment. He would sit with a textbook open, but his eyes would be staring at the intricate patterns on the ceiling. He wasn't dumb. Clara knew that. He was just lost. The tutors came and went, each one leaving with a frustrated shake of the head. One Tuesday afternoon, the quiet of the mansion was shattered. Mr. Harrison's voice boomed from his study, the heavy oak door doing little to muffle his anger. "This is the third failing grade this month, Ethan. A Harrison does not fail. We build things. We lead. We do not get C-minuses in history." Clara froze in the hallway, a feather duster clutched in her hand. Her mother shot her a warning look, a silent plea to keep moving, to disappear. But Clara couldn't. Ethan's voice was small, barely a whisper. "I'm trying, Dad. I just don't get it. The dates, the names, it's all a jumble." "Excuses," Mr. Harrison roared. "Your great-grandfather fought in a war. My father built a business with his bare hands. And you? You can't even remember the year the Declaration of Independence was signed. I've had enough. One more failing grade, and you're going to Blackwood Military Academy. They'll make a man out of you. They'll teach you discipline." The threat hung in the air, cold and sharp. Clara had heard the staff whispering about Blackwood. It was a harsh place, a school for boys who were sent away to be fixed. The silence that followed was heavier than the shouting. Clara heard a soft sniffle, then the sound of the study door opening. Ethan walked out, his face pale and his eyes red. He didn't even see Clara as he brushed past her and ran up the grand staircase. Mr. Harrison stood in the doorway, his face like thunder. He spotted Clara, and his eyes narrowed. "What are you doing just standing there? Get back to work." "Yes, sir," Clara whispered, her heart pounding. She scurried away, but the image of Ethan's defeated face was burned into her mind. Later that day, Clara found him in the library. He was slumped in a large leather chair, a history book lying open and ignored on his lap. He had been crying. He looked up as she entered, his expression turning defensive, expecting her to mock him. Clara didn't. She simply walked to a nearby shelf and pretended to dust a row of leather-bound classics. The silence stretched between them. Finally, she spoke, her voice so soft it was barely a breath. He wasn't a king. Ethan frowned, confused. What? The chapter you're on, Clara said, nodding toward his book without looking at him. King George III. You're thinking of him like a king in a fairy tale. He wasn't. He was a politician with a crown. He was losing his mind, and he was terrified of losing the colonies because it would make him look weak to the other countries in Europe. Ethan sat up a little straighter. He looked from his book to the small, blonde girl with the dust rag. How do you know that? I read, she said simply. When my mom cleans here, I read the books you're done with. She paused, then took a small risk. You're trying to memorize dates. Don't. Memorize the story. Why were they fighting? The colonists weren't just angry about taxes. They were angry because they felt like the king's children, and he was treating them like strangers. It was a family fight. A big, messy, family fight that ended in divorce. For the first time all day, a flicker of understanding crossed Ethan's face. He looked down at the page. A family fight. That made more sense than a list of acts and proclamations. Clara felt a surge of courage. The image of the white envelopes on her kitchen table flashed in her mind. Her mother's tired face. Ethan's tears. An idea, wild and dangerous, took root. I could help you, she whispered. Ethan stared at her. Help me? My father pays thousands for the best tutors in the city. They can't help me. They're trying to force facts into your head, Clara said. That's not learning. That's just stacking bricks. You have to see how they fit together to build the house. She took another step closer. Meet me here. Tomorrow. After the cook leaves for the day. Before my mom and I are done. No one will know. It was a reckless offer. If they were caught, her mother would be fired. They would lose everything. But Clara looked at Ethan's desperate face, and she saw a reflection of her own quiet desperation. They were both trapped, just in different kinds of cages. Ethan was silent for a long moment. He looked around the enormous library, a room that had always felt like a prison to him. He looked at this strange, quiet girl who seemed to understand more in a whisper than his tutors did in an hour of shouting. Okay, he said. Tomorrow. The next day, the library felt different. The air was thick with conspiracy. Clara arrived with a tray of polished silver objects she was meant to be putting away. Ethan was already there, pacing nervously. My dad gave me a pop quiz this morning, he muttered. I barely passed. He said the next test is Friday. On the Revolutionary War. All of it. Clara nodded, her expression calm. Okay, we don't have much time. She put the silver tray down on a large table. She picked up a sugar bowl. This is England, she said. She then grabbed 12 silver spoons and placed them in a cluster far away from the bowl. These are the colonies. Ethan watched, intrigued. England, the sugar bowl, wants the sugar, the money, from the spoons. It needs it to pay for a big, expensive war it just fought with France. She picked up a heavy silver candlestick. This is France. She continued, using the silverware to lay out the entire conflict. The salt shaker became the king. A pepper mill was a stubborn colonial leader. The Boston Tea Party was reenacted by tipping a spoon into a teacup. It wasn't a lesson. It was a story, a strategy game played out in gleaming silver. For the first time, Ethan wasn't just hearing about the past, he was seeing it. He started asking questions. So, if that spoon is Boston, where was the first shot fired? Clara pointed with her finger. Right there. Lexington. A tiny little place. It wasn't a big battle. It was more like an argument that got out of hand. But it was the spark. They worked for an hour. Clara never raised her voice. She never called him dumb. When he got something wrong, she would simply rearrange the board and say, look at it from this angle. By the time her mother called for her, Ethan was explaining the role of the French Navy using a gravy boat. He looked at Clara, his eyes wide with a feeling he hadn't felt in years. Hope. I think I get it. You do, Clara said with a small smile. You just needed a better map. They met every day that week. Clara used whatever was on hand. She drew maps on dusty tabletops and wiped them away. She explained complex economic theories using the cook's grocery lists. She taught him about battlefield strategy using fallen leaves in the garden. She wasn't just repeating facts from a book. She was connecting them to the world, making them real and alive. She also learned about him. He wasn't good at memorizing things, but he was a visual learner. He was brilliant at understanding systems, at seeing how one piece affected another. No one had ever bothered to find that out. They just saw the failing grades. On Friday, Ethan walked into his father's study to take his test. Clara was in the hallway, polishing the handles on a large Chinese vase, her stomach in knots. She could hear the quiet scratching of Ethan's pen, then the long, agonizing silence. Finally, the door opened. Ethan walked out. He looked straight at Clara, and for a split second, he gave her a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. He didn't smile. He didn't dare. But Clara understood. A few minutes later, Mr. Harrison stormed out of the study. He wasn't yelling this time. His face was a mask of pure, stunned confusion. He held Ethan's test in his hand. He walked right past Clara without a glance, muttering to himself. A 94. How is that possible? Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking. They had done it. They had gotten away with it. But as she watched Mr. Harrison's retreating back, a new feeling crept in. It wasn't just relief. It was a cold, sharp dread. A man like Walter Harrison didn't accept miracles. He investigated them, and his gaze would soon be turning to every corner of his perfect, polished house, searching for an explanation, searching for her. That evening, after they had returned to their small apartment, Clara sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. Her mother was already asleep, exhausted from the long day. On Clara's lap was a worn, leather-bound book. It was her only personal possession of any value. It wasn't a storybook. It was a journal filled with handwritten notes, maps, and diagrams. On the inside cover, in faded ink, was a name, General Elias Croft. Her great-grandfather. People called him a war hero, a legend. To Clara, he was a teacher. He had died long before she was born, but his mind lived in these pages. He wrote about history, strategy, and human nature. He believed that any problem, on or off the battlefield, could be solved if you simply learned how to see it from every possible angle. Clara had been reading his journal since she was old enough to understand the words. It was her secret, her inheritance. It was where her own strange knowledge of the world came from. She traced his signature with her finger. He had been a great man, a leader, and she was his descendant, hiding in the shadows, polishing a rich man's silver. She had used his knowledge to help Ethan, but in doing so, she had stepped out of the shadows, just a little. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the millionaire was watching. The game was far from over. It had only just begun. The A+ on Ethan's next history quiz was not a relief. It was a trigger. Walter Harrison had not built his fortune by accepting things at face value. He was a man who looked for the trick in the magic, the flaw in the flawless gem. His son, a boy who struggled to remember his own phone number, was now acing exams on the intricacies of the Constitutional Convention. It didn't add up. The numbers were wrong. He started watching. His gaze, usually fixed on stock market tickers and financial reports, now swept over his own home with the intensity of a hawk. He observed the expensive tutors, listening to their methods. They were drill sergeants of data, forcing memorization through repetition. He saw the way Ethan's eyes glazed over, the subtle slump in his shoulders as they spoke. This was not the source of the change. His attention turned to the staff. The cook, a woman who had been with the family for 20 years, knew more about soufflé than Socrates. The gardeners were experts in soil pH, not political science. The drivers kept to themselves. They were all loyal, predictable parts of a well-oiled machine. Then there was the maid, Helen, a good worker, efficient, quiet, almost invisible. And her daughter, Clara. The girl was a ghost. She floated through the rooms, a small, blonde shadow with a dust rag. He barely ever noticed her. But now he did. He started to see things he'd previously overlooked. A book slightly out of place in the library. A smudge of chalk dust near the garden shed that looked suspiciously like a map of the 13 colonies. Small things. Trivial things. But Walter Harrison knew that empires and mysteries were often built on trivial things. One afternoon, he came home early. He didn't use the grand front entrance. Instead, He walked around the side of the house, his expensive leather shoes silent on the manicured lawn. Through the tall windows of the library, he saw them. They were on the floor, surrounded by books. But they weren't reading. Clara was holding a small, polished stone in her hand. Ethan held another. She was explaining something, her voice too low to hear, her expression serious and intent. She pushed her stone forward. Ethan responded, sliding his own stone across the polished wood. It wasn't a lesson. It looked like a war game. Walter stood behind a large oak tree, his heart pounding with a strange mix of anger and raw curiosity. Who was this girl? This child of his servant, who moved with the quiet confidence of a general commanding her troops on a battlefield of polished oak. He watched for nearly 10 minutes as she explained, gestured, and guided his son through what looked like a complex military strategy. And Ethan was not just listening. He was engaged. His eyes were bright, his posture alert. He was arguing a point, pointing to a book, then back to the stones. He was learning. Walter felt a sharp, unfamiliar pang in his chest. It was a feeling he couldn't immediately name. It was jealousy. His son, who shut down in his presence, who met his lectures with a wall of sullen silence, was alive and animated with the maid's daughter. He, Walter Harrison, paid for the finest education money could buy, but the real teacher was a 12-year-old girl who polished his silver. The injustice of it was a bitter pill, but the businessman in him was intrigued. This was an asset he hadn't accounted for. He backed away from the window before they could see him. He didn't storm in. He didn't fire Helen. That would be too simple, too clumsy. He needed more information. He needed to understand the source of her knowledge. He went to his study and made a phone call. It was to a private investigator, a man he kept on retainer for digging into the backgrounds of business rivals. "I have a new subject for you," Walter said, his voice low and cold. "A child. Her name is Clara. Her mother's name is Helen. She's my maid. I want to know everything. Schools, friends, family, every corner of her life. And I want it done quietly. No one can know I'm looking." "He's watching us," Ethan whispered the next day. They were hidden in a small alcove in the garden, shielded by a large rose bush. Clara's blood ran cold. "How do you know?" "I can feel it," Ethan said. "He's different. He asks me questions about school, but he's not really listening to the answers. He's looking at me, like he's trying to see inside my head." He kicked at a loose stone on the path. He found the map I drew on my notepad. "The one you showed me, of the naval blockades." He didn't say anything. He just looked at it for a long time, and then put it down. Clara felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach. Mr. Harrison was a hunter. She had seen the way he stalked the halls of his company in the business documentaries she'd watched online. He didn't stop until he had what he wanted. And now he was hunting for their secret. "We have to be more careful," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Careful," Ethan scoffed, his fear making him reckless. "Or maybe we should just tell him. Tell him you're a better teacher than anyone he's ever hired. And get my mother fired?" Clara shot back, her own fear turning to anger. "You don't understand. Your father's world has safety nets. My world has nothing. Just my mom. Just this job. We lose this, and we lose everything. The apartment, the doctors." She stopped, realizing she had said too much. Ethan's anger deflated, replaced by a look of shame. "The doctors? Is your mom sick?" Clara looked away, at the perfectly pruned roses. "The medical bills," she said quietly. "From my father. Before he died." She rarely spoke of him. He had been a soldier, a quiet man who came back from the war with wounds no one could see. The wounds festered, turning into an illness that ate him from the inside out and left them with a mountain of debt. It was the reason they were here, living in the shadow of the Harrison fortune. Ethan was silent. He had never once thought about where Clara went when she left his mansion. He had never considered that she had a life, a history, and problems that made his fear of military school seem small and childish. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. Clara gave a small, sad shrug. "It's just how things are." She looked him in the eye. "So you see why we can't get caught." "We can't." He nodded, a new sense of gravity on his young face. This wasn't just a game anymore. It wasn't just about grades. It was about Clara's life. Their next lesson was on science, a subject Ethan despised even more than history. The topic was electricity. His textbook was a dense forest of diagrams and equations. "I can't do this one, Clara," he said, defeated before they even began. It's just squiggles and numbers. It doesn't mean anything. Clara looked at the book. She thought of her great-grandfather's journal. He hadn't been a scientist, but he was a master of systems. He wrote about supply lines, communication networks, the flow of information on a battlefield. She closed the textbook. Forget the book. Let's go to the kitchen. Confused, Ethan followed her. The cook had gone for the day. The vast, stainless steel kitchen was empty and silent. Clara opened a drawer and pulled out a potato. Then she found 2 different coins, a penny and a nickel, from a small dish by the phone. She found some spare wire in a utility drawer. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked. "We're going to build a battery," she said simply. She pushed the coins into the potato, one on each side. She attached a small piece of wire to each coin. Then, she did something unexpected. She went to the pantry and came back with Ethan's digital watch, the one his father had given him for his birthday, a piece of technology worth more than everything Clara's family owned. "Are you crazy?" Ethan hissed. "That's my watch. Trust me," she said, her eyes focused on her task. She carefully touched the 2 wires to the battery contacts on the back of the watch. The digital display, which had been blank, flickered to life. Faint numbers glowed in the dim kitchen light. Ethan gasped. "How?" "It's not magic," Clara explained, her voice filled with a quiet excitement. "It's a circuit. The potato acid reacts with the 2 different metals, the copper in the penny and the nickel. That reaction makes a tiny flow of electrons. That flow is electricity. It's a river. And the watch is just a water wheel that uses the river's power to turn." She looked up at him. "You don't have to memorize the formulas, Ethan. You just have to see the river." He stared at the potato, then at his watch, then at Clara. The complex diagrams in his textbook suddenly clicked into place. They weren't just squiggles. They were maps of the river. They spent the next hour turning the Harrisons' state-of-the-art kitchen into a makeshift laboratory. They used lemons and apples to power a tiny LED light. Clara explained conductors and insulators using a metal spoon and a wooden one. She made the abstract tangible. She turned science into an experiment you could hold in your hand. Upstairs, in his study, Walter Harrison sat at his desk. The preliminary report from the private investigator lay in front of him. It was sparse. Clara was a quiet student with average grades. No friends to speak of. Her mother, Helen, had a spotless work record. Her late husband was a decorated veteran, Sergeant Michael Croft, who had died 2 years prior from a service-related illness. The report noted the significant medical debt left behind. It was a portrait of a simple, unremarkable, and difficult life. It explained nothing. It didn't explain the war games on the library floor. It didn't explain the 94 on the history test. And it certainly didn't explain how his son was at this very moment, learning about electrical currents from a potato in the kitchen. Walter had installed a new, state-of-the-art security system a month ago, a system that included discrete audio recorders in the main rooms of the house. He hadn't turned them on yet. It had felt like a violation of his own home. Now, he reached forward and pressed a button on his console. The small speaker on his desk crackled to life. He could hear their voices, faint but clear, from the kitchen. "So the wire is the riverbed," Ethan was saying, his voice filled with the thrill of discovery. "And the electrons are the water. And the battery is what? The mountain spring." "Exactly," Clara's voice replied. "And a switch is a dam. You can open it or close it to control the flow." Walter leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. He listened for a long, long time. He wasn't just eavesdropping on a secret tutoring session. He was listening to his own son come alive. The cold anger he had felt was slowly being replaced by something far more complex. A sense of awe, and a deep, unsettling question. Who was this girl? He picked up the investigator's report again. Sergeant Michael Croft. He typed the name into his computer. An old news article appeared. A local hero story. There was a picture of the soldier, a young man with a serious face and kind eyes. And standing next to him, a much older man in a decorated military uniform. The caption identified him. General Elias Croft. Michael Croft's grandfather. Walter Harrison's blood ran cold. General Elias Croft. The ghost of the Ardennes. A legendary military strategist, a master tactician whose books were required reading at West Point. A bona fide American hero. He looked from the picture on the screen to the speaker on his desk, where the general's great-granddaughter was explaining science with a potato. And suddenly, impossibly, it all started to make sense. The name echoed in the silent, opulent study, General Elias Croft. Walter Harrison felt like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. He was a man who dealt in facts, in market projections, and calculated risks. But this felt like something out of a novel. The blood of a legendary military mind, a genius of strategy and human psychology, was flowing through the veins of the girl who dusted his furniture. The quiet, unassuming child in his hallways was the heir to a legacy of brilliance. He clicked off the audio feed from the kitchen. The sudden silence was deafening. He stared at the photograph on his screen, the old general standing proud and erect, his eyes sharp even in the grainy black and white photo. Then he pictured Clara, small and blonde, explaining a potato battery with that same unnerving focus in her eyes. It was like looking at two ends of a telescope. One magnified a national hero, the other a poor, indebted child. Yet, the same light of fierce intelligence shone through both lenses. His first instinct, the one that had made him a billionaire, was to see this as a resource, an untapped asset. This girl, this prodigy hiding in plain sight, was the key to unlocking his son's potential. He could use her. He could pay her, control the situation, and mold it to his advantage. It was a simple business transaction, but a second, more complicated feeling followed. It was the same unease he'd felt watching them from the garden window. It was the sting of paternal failure. He had given his son every advantage, wealth, status, the best schools, and none of it had worked. A 12-year-old girl with nothing but a battered journal and a famous last name had succeeded where his millions had failed. She hadn't just taught Ethan facts, she had reached him. She had lit a fire in his son's mind that Walter had long feared was extinguished forever. How could he put a price on that? How could he turn that into a mere transaction? And a third thought, colder and sharper than the others, slithered in. This girl was a Croft. Her great-grandfather had commanded armies. He had outwitted enemies on a global stage. And she, in her own quiet way, was outwitting him, right here, in his own home. The secrecy, the clever use of everyday objects, the way she had identified and exploited his son's unique learning style. It was all a masterful campaign of covert instruction. He was the king of his castle, and a secret, powerful force was operating right under his nose. He didn't just feel like a failed father. He felt like an outmaneuvered commander. Walter Harrison did not like being outmaneuvered. He would not confront them. Not yet. A direct approach would scatter them like birds. The girl would retreat into her shell of silence, and his son would erect his walls of resentment higher than ever. No, a man like Elias Croft would not have charged headfirst into an enemy camp. He would have probed its defenses. He would have tested its strength. Walter decided to do the same. He would set a new test, a challenge that no ordinary tutor, and certainly no child, could possibly prepare his son for. He would see just how deep this inherited genius truly ran. The next evening, Walter called Ethan into his study. The room was designed to intimidate, with its dark wood, towering bookshelves, and the massive mahogany desk that served as Walter's throne. "Your grades have improved," Walter began, his voice devoid of warmth. It was a statement of fact, not a compliment. "Your science and history scores are acceptable." Ethan stood before the desk, his hands clasped behind his back. He braced himself for the butt. "But life isn't about memorizing the past, Ethan. It's about shaping the future. It's about seeing the entire board, not just the square in front of you." He opened a drawer and pulled out a thin, elegant laptop. He slid it across the polished desk. "This is a simulation program, the same one used in the top business schools. It's a geopolitical crisis scenario. You are the leader of a small, resource-rich nation. Your neighbors are becoming aggressive. You have trade disputes, military threats, and internal political unrest. You have 1 week. Your goal is to navigate the crisis without collapsing your economy or starting a war. The program will score your every decision." Ethan stared at the laptop as if it were a venomous snake. His heart sank. This wasn't a test of knowledge. It was a test of instinct, of strategy, of the very things he had always felt he lacked. It was a test designed for his father, not for him. I don't know anything about this," he stammered. "You'll learn," Walter said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This isn't about what you know. It's about how you think. Don't disappoint me." Dismissed, Ethan picked up the laptop and walked out of the study like a man heading to the gallows. He found Clara in the hallway, carefully wiping down the baseboards. She looked up, and she knew instantly that something was wrong. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "He knows," Ethan whispered, his voice tight with panic. "He has to know? He gave me an impossible test. A trick. He wants me to fail so he can send me away." Later, hidden away in the rarely used sunroom at the back of the mansion, he opened the laptop. The screen lit up with a complex interface, maps overlaid with troop movements, scrolling news feeds detailing economic sanctions, and pop-up windows demanding immediate decisions on everything from trade tariffs to espionage. It was overwhelming, a tidal wave of information. "I can't do this," Ethan said, pushing the laptop away. "It's too much. There are 100 things happening at once." Clara looked at the screen, her expression unreadable. She didn't see chaos. She saw a system, a complex, interconnected web of cause and effect. It was just a bigger version of the silverware on the library table, a grander scale of the potato in the kitchen. She thought of her great-grandfather's journal, of the chapters on resource management and diplomatic strategy. He wrote that every conflict, no matter how large, was simply a conversation. You just had to understand the language. "Yes, you can," she said softly. She pulled the laptop closer. "Don't look at everything at once. That's what they want you to do. It's designed to make you panic. What's the first rule in a crisis?" Ethan shook his head, lost. "Information," Clara said. "You don't make a move until you know the terrain. We don't need to solve the problem yet. We just need to understand it." For the next hour, they didn't make a single move in the simulation. Instead, Clara guided Ethan through the data. They read the dossiers on the rival leaders. She showed him how to spot the bias in the news feeds. She had him map out the supply chains for his country's most valuable resources. "Your father called it a geopolitical crisis," Clara said, pointing to a graph showing his nation's dependency on imported grain. "But look, it's a resource crisis. Your biggest enemy isn't the country with the army on your border. It's the country that sells you your food. They have all the power, and they don't have to fire a single shot." A light went on in Ethan's eyes. He was seeing the river again. He had been so focused on the flashing red lights of military threats that he had completely missed the silent, deadly economic chokehold. From his study, Walter Harrison watched them on a hidden camera feed he had activated in the sunroom. He had expected to see panic. He had expected to see Ethan give up. Instead, he watched, utterly transfixed, as the maid's daughter deconstructed his complex, expensive business school simulation with the calm, methodical precision of a master watchmaker. She wasn't just telling Ethan what to do. She was teaching him how to see. She was giving him the tools to think like a Croft. For the first time in his life, Walter Harrison felt a tremor of fear. This girl wasn't just smart. She wasn't just gifted. She was powerful, and he had absolutely no idea what to do with her. They worked in secret every day that week. They became a team. Ethan, with his natural ability to see systems, began to anticipate moves. Clara, with her deep well of strategic knowledge, guided their overall direction. They used phrases from the journal. They called their strategy the patient fence, focusing on defensive alliances and economic stability rather than aggressive military posturing. They found a non-obvious solution, investing their limited political capital in agricultural technology to break their dependency on foreign food imports. It was a long-term, low-glory solution that the simulation's aggressive AI didn't anticipate. The night before the deadline, they ran their final move. The simulation processed the results, and a single score appeared on the screen, 98%. Optimal outcome achieved. Ethan stared at the screen, then looked at Clara. He wasn't just relieved. He was proud. They had done it. "We did it," he breathed, a wide, genuine smile spreading across his face. Clara smiled back, a rare, unguarded expression of warmth. In that small, shared victory, the gulf between the millionaire's son and the maid's daughter vanished completely. They were just two kids, allies, and friends. But as Ethan closed the laptop, Clara's smile faded. A new, unsettling thought had taken root. The test hadn't felt random. It had felt specific. It was a test of strategy, of seeing the whole board. It was a test perfectly suited to the skills she had learned from her great-grandfather's journal. It was almost as if Mr. Harrison hadn't been testing his son. It was as if he had been testing her. And if that were true, it meant he knew their secret. He had been watching them all along. The game they thought they were playing was over. A new, far more dangerous one was about to begin. Walter didn't look at the laptop. His eyes were fixed on his son, a gaze so intense it was almost a physical force. He had seen the 98% score pop up on his own monitor 10 minutes ago. He had watched the entire final sequence of their strategy play out. The result was not just a success. It was an elegant, unexpected masterpiece of diplomacy and foresight. It was a solution he himself would have been proud of. "You didn't do this alone," Walter said. It was not a question. Ethan's back went rigid. This was the moment. The accusation. He had prepared for it, rehearsed his denials with Clara. But looking into his father's all-knowing eyes, the lies withered on his tongue. "No," Ethan said, his voice quiet but clear. "I didn't." A flicker of something, surprise, respect, passed through Walter's stern expression. He had expected a lie. The truth was an interesting opening move. "Send her in," Walter commanded. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. "Dad, don't." "This was my—" "Send her in, Ethan," Walter repeated, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm. "Now." Ethan turned and walked to the door. Clara was standing in the hallway, polishing a brass lamp as if it were the most important task in the world. Her face was pale, but her eyes were resolute. She had known this was coming. They looked at each other for a long moment. No words were needed. Ethan gave a slight, helpless shrug, and she gave a tiny, reassuring nod in return. He held the door open for her. Clara walked into the lion's den. She stopped in the center of the room, a small, blonde figure dwarfed by the towering shelves and the imposing man behind the desk. She didn't look at the floor. She met Walter Harrison's gaze directly. In that moment, she was not the maid's daughter. She was the great-granddaughter of General Elias Croft, and she would not be intimidated. Walter gestured to the chair opposite his desk, the one usually reserved for business rivals or corporate lawyers. "Sit." Clara sat. Her feet barely touched the floor. He steepled his fingers, his eyes never leaving her face. "The patient fence," he said, the words dropping into the silence like stones into a well. A classic Croft strategy. Defensive, patient, built around economic resilience rather than military might. A beautiful execution. Where did you read about it? Clara's blood ran cold. He didn't just know she had helped. He knew how. He knew the source. The journal. "In a book," she answered, her voice a whisper. "Indeed," Walter said, a humorless smile touching his lips. He opened a drawer and slid a file across the desk. It was the private investigator's report. On top was the grainy photo of General Croft. "A family book, I presume." The game was over. There was no point in hiding anymore. Clara simply nodded, her eyes locked on the picture of the great-grandfather she had never met but knew so intimately. "For 6 weeks," Walter continued, his voice a low, controlled rumble, "you have been operating in my home. You have been giving my son a clandestine education. You have used my property, my time, and my son, all without my permission. You have lied, you have hidden, and you have broken the trust my family placed in your mother. By any reasonable definition, this is grounds for immediate dismissal. Helen would be fired. You would both be escorted off this property within the hour." Clara flinched as if he had struck her. The threat, bald and brutal, hung in the air. This was it. The end. The white envelopes on the kitchen table flashed in her mind. Her mother's tired, trusting face. Failure. Ruin. She looked at him, her fear warring with a sudden surge of defiance. "What you hired for Ethan wasn't working," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "The tutors, the drills, they were trying to build a wall, brick by brick, without showing him what a house looks like. He's not stupid. He just learns differently. I didn't break your trust. I helped your son." Walter leaned forward. "You did more than help him," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "You taught him how to think. You gave him a confidence I have been trying to buy for him his entire life. Which brings me to my problem." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I could fire your mother. I could send Ethan to military school tomorrow and hire a new team of experts. That is the simple, logical path. But I am a businessman, and I do not discard valuable assets. And you, Clara Croft, are the most valuable asset I have come across in a very long time." Clara stared at him, bewildered. This was not the conversation she had expected. "So," Walter continued, leaning back in his chair, "I am not going to fire your mother. In fact, I am going to give her a raise. A significant one. I am also going to pay off every single dollar of your family's medical debt. The white envelopes will stop coming. Your mother will be able to sleep at night. Clara felt the room tilt. The weight that had been crushing her family for years, the monster that lived in their tiny apartment, vanquished with a single sentence. It was a miracle. It was the answer to every prayer she had ever whispered in the dark. But she knew, with the chilling certainty of a Croft, that this was not a gift. It was a transaction. A cage, gilded with generosity. "What's the price?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Walter's thin smile returned. "There is no price. There is a contract. You will become Ethan's official academic strategist. You will work with him every day. You will have access to any resources you require. Books, computers, tutors to assist you. You will bring his grades up to the highest level, and you will prepare him to one day take over my company. You will mold him, shape him, and give him the tools he needs to succeed in my world. You will, in essence, continue what you have been doing. But you will do it for me now." He let the offer hang in the air. It was everything she could ever have dreamed of. Security for her mother. An end to their poverty. A chance to use her mind. To be something more than the invisible girl with the dust rag. "And if I say no?" Clara asked, though she already knew the answer. "If you say no," Walter said, his voice turning to ice, "then the original offer stands. Your mother is fired. The debt remains. And I will make sure she never gets a reference to work in a house like this again. You will lose everything. Your choice." The trap was sprung. It was perfect in its cruelty. He wasn't just offering her a future. He was using her mother's security as leverage. He had found her one weakness, her love for her mother, and he was squeezing it with all his immense, calculated pressure. To accept was to chain herself to him and his son, to become a tool in his grand design. To refuse was to condemn her mother to a life of struggle and despair. He was not just offering her a job. He was buying her mind, her loyalty, her future. "I'll need to talk to my mother," she said, stalling, her mind racing. "You will do no such thing," Walter countered instantly. "Your mother is not to know the details of this arrangement. As far as she is concerned, I am giving her a raise out of appreciation for her excellent work, and I have hired you as a simple companion and tutor for Ethan. The truth of this conversation stays in this room. That is a non-negotiable condition." He was isolating her, ensuring she had no one to turn to, no one to confide in. She was to be his secret weapon, and secret weapons do not have allies. Clara looked past him, through the large window behind his desk. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The world outside this room was vast and full of possibilities. But inside, the walls were closing in. Her great-grandfather had faced down enemy armies. He had made life-and-death decisions for thousands of men. And now, she, his last descendant, faced her own battlefield, right here in this rich man's study. And the choice she made would determine the fate of the only person she had in the world. She thought of her mother's hands, rough and chapped from years of cleaning other people's houses. She thought of her mother's quiet sigh in the middle of the night, the sound of worry that never truly slept. Walter Harrison was offering to heal that. He was offering peace. And the only thing it would cost was her freedom. She looked back at the billionaire, her eyes clear and cold. The decision was made. "Okay," she said. "I accept." The contract changed everything. And it changed nothing. On the surface, life continued as before. Helen still cleaned the mansion with her quiet efficiency, her face now free from the deep lines of worry that had been etched there for years. She believed her raise was a reward for her service, and the sudden, miraculous clearing of their debt was an act of anonymous charity, perhaps from her late husband's old military unit. She moved with a lighter step, and the sound of her humming sometimes filled the cavernous hallways. To Clara, that sound was both a comfort and a constant, painful reminder of the price that had been paid for it. For Clara and Ethan, their secret lessons were now official. They worked in the library, no longer hiding in sunrooms or garden alcoves. The dynamic, however, had fundamentally shifted. Walter Harrison was an ever-present, silent partner in their sessions. He would often sit in his large leather armchair by the unlit fireplace, ostensibly reading financial reports, but his attention was a palpable force in the room. He never interfered, never offered a word of praise or criticism. He simply watched, his eyes missing nothing. It was a constant, unnerving performance review. Clara was no longer just a friend helping a friend. She was an employee with a deliverable, a new and improved Ethan Harrison. The joy of their shared discovery was now tinged with the pressure of expectation. She had access to every resource she could imagine. Rare books were delivered overnight. Advanced science equipment was installed in a spare room that became their dedicated lab. If she mentioned an interest in cartography, a collection of antique maps would appear the next day. She had the keys to a kingdom of knowledge, but the cage, no matter how gilded, was still a cage. Ethan, for his part, blossomed under the new arrangement. Freed from the immediate threat of military school and the shame of his failures, his natural intelligence, once dammed up, began to flow. With Clara as his guide, he devoured subjects he once despised. He didn't just learn history, he debated it. He didn't just conduct experiments, he designed them. He was becoming the son Walter had always wanted, but the transformation was not entirely what the father had intended. A new confidence grew in Ethan, but it wasn't the arrogant, ruthless confidence of his father. It was a quiet, steady self-assurance rooted in genuine understanding. And his loyalty, which Walter had assumed would belong to him as the architect of this new world, was given freely and entirely to Clara. He saw the sacrifice she had made. He saw the invisible weight she carried behind her calm expression. He knew she was not just his tutor. She was his protector, his ally, and his only true friend. He saw the bars of the gilded cage, even if she tried to pretend they weren't there. One afternoon, about a year into their arrangement, Ethan was working on a complex economics problem set by his father. It involved a hostile takeover of a smaller company. "It doesn't make sense," Ethan said, pushing the papers away in frustration. "We'd be destroying them. The company is small, but it's innovative, and it treats its employees well. Dad's plan is to buy it, strip it for its patents, and then lay off half the workforce. It's cruel." Clara looked at the documents. She recognized the strategy. It was efficient, brutal, and highly profitable. It was a classic Walter Harrison move. "It's not about being cruel, Ethan," she said, echoing the cold logic she had learned from a year under his watch. "It's about winning. The bigger company survives and grows stronger by killing the smaller one." Ethan shot back, his voice rising. "That's not strength, Clara. That's just being a bully. Isn't that what your great-grandfather wrote about? That true victory is when you can win without having to destroy your enemy." Clara was taken aback. He was using her own lessons, the wisdom of Elias Croft, against the very world she was being paid to prepare him for. He was right, of course. The general had believed in strength, but also in honor. He saw no glory in a victory that was morally bankrupt. "Your father's world has different rules," she said softly. "Then I don't want to live in it," Ethan declared. He stood up and began to pace the library. "This whole year, I thought I was learning how to be smart, but I'm just learning how to be him. And I don't want to be him." He stopped and looked at Clara, his eyes pleading. "And I don't want you to become like him, either." His words struck Clara with the force of a physical blow. She looked at herself, at the expensive tablet in her hands, at the comfortable life she now led. Had she made a deal with the devil, not just for her mother's security, but for her own? Had she traded her soul for a cage of comfort and knowledge? In trying to save her mother, had she lost herself? The moment of crisis came a week later. Walter called Clara into his study alone. He was standing by the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured gardens. "Ethan has been accepted to Northwood Preparatory Academy," he announced without turning around. "He leaves in the fall. It is the finest feeder school for the Ivy League. It is the next step in the plan." Clara's heart froze. Leaving. Ethan was leaving. "His foundation is strong, thanks to you," Walter continued, finally turning to face her. "Your work here is done. Your contract is fulfilled. I will, of course, provide a generous severance package. A trust fund will be established in your name. You and your mother will be comfortable for the rest of your lives. You will be free." Free. The words sounded like a death sentence. Free from the gilded cage, yes, but free from Ethan. Free from the purpose that had defined her life for over a year. She would go back to being the maid's daughter, only now she would be rich. A ghost with a full bank account. "And Ethan?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Does he know?" "I told him this morning," Walter said dismissively. "He was emotional. He'll get over it. It's for his own good. He needs to be among his peers, to learn how to lead them." He'll hate you for this, Clara said, a raw, untempered anger rising in her. You're taking away the only thing that ever worked for him. You're taking away his friend. You're putting him back in a box, just a bigger, more expensive one. For the first time, Walter's mask of cool control cracked. A flash of raw fury showed in his eyes. I am his father. I know what is best for him. You were a tool, a very effective tool. But the job is finished. You are no longer required. A tool. The word hung in the air, cold and sharp. All her work, all her care, all her sacrifice, reduced to a simple, disposable object. Suddenly, something inside Clara snapped. The quiet, obedient girl vanished, and the great-granddaughter of Elias Croft stood in her place. No, she said, her voice ringing with a newfound authority. The job is not finished. You think you've won, Mr. Harrison. You think you've bought your son success. But you've taught him nothing about the most important thing. And what would that be? Walter sneered. Loyalty, Clara said, her eyes blazing. You buy it, you sell it, you trade it. You think it's a commodity. But Ethan, he gives it. He learned how to be smart from me, yes. But I learned how to be brave from him. He was brave enough to trust me when no one else would. He was brave enough to stand up to you just now. And you're about to throw all of that away because you're a coward. You are in no position to call me a coward, Walter hissed. Are not, Clara challenged, taking a step forward. You're terrified. You're terrified that your son loves his tutor more than he loves his own father. You're terrified that the maid's daughter succeeded where your millions failed. You're terrified that you don't know how to connect with your own son, so you have to control him instead. She had him. She could see it in the tightening of his jaw, the whitening of his knuckles as he gripped the edge of his desk. She had aimed her words like precision weapons at the one crack in his formidable armor, his insecurity as a father. You can send him to that school, Clara continued, her voice softening slightly. And he may even succeed. But he will never forgive you. You will have a successful son who despises you. A brilliant heir who looks at you with contempt. You will have won the war, Mr. Harrison, but you will have lost your son. And you will be utterly and completely alone. She let her final words hang in the suffocating silence. She had laid the entire battlefield bare. She had shown him the future his current strategy would lead to. It was the most important lesson she had ever given. Walter Harrison stood behind his desk for a long, agonizing minute. He looked at this incredible, impossible child who had seen right through him, who had dismantled his life's philosophy with a few, simple, devastatingly true sentences. He looked past her, to the door of the study, which had been pushed slightly ajar. He knew Ethan was standing there. He knew his son had heard every word. He collapsed into his chair, the strength seeming to drain out of him. The billionaire, the titan of industry, the ruthless commander, looked old and tired and defeated. What do you want? He asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. I don't want anything from you, Clara replied. But your son wants a father. Not a CEO, not a drill sergeant. A father. She turned and walked out of the study. Ethan was in the hall, his eyes wide and filled with tears. He looked from Clara to the broken man in the study, and then back to Clara. She gave him a small, sad smile. It's your move now, she whispered. Then she walked away, down the grand hallway, her work truly, finally, done. In the quiet that followed, a choice was made. Walter Harrison did not send Ethan to Northwood. Instead, he did the hardest thing he had ever done in his life. He surrendered. He started having dinner with his son, not as a commander debriefing a subordinate, but as a father. He asked Ethan questions about his day, and, for the first time, he actually listened to the answers. He asked Ethan to teach him, to explain the things he was learning from Clara. Slowly, awkwardly, the two of them began to build a bridge across the vast, silent chasm that had separated them for years. Clara's contract was torn up. In its place, Walter offered her a new one. It was a full scholarship, covering her entire education, from high school through to any university in the world she chose to attend. No strings attached. No conditions. It was not a payment. It was a gift. An apology. A truce. Her mother, Helen, was offered the position of household manager, with a salary that meant she would never have to worry about money again. She was no longer just the maid. She was a respected part of the family's life. Clara remained Ethan's best friend. They studied together, not as tutor and student, but as equals. They pushed each other, challenged each other, and prepared for the future together. One crisp autumn afternoon, 2 years later, Clara stood with Ethan and Walter on a sun-drenched university campus. It was Clara's first day. She had been accepted, on her own merits, into the university's renowned history and political science program. Walter Harrison, the man who had once tried to buy her mind, was now proudly carrying her books. As they stood by a large oak tree, Walter turned to Clara, his expression one of profound, humbled gratitude. "You taught me a valuable lesson, Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I spent my whole life trying to build an empire of wealth and power. You showed me that the most valuable assets we have are not the ones we own, but the people we love. You didn't just save my son. You saved me." Clara looked at the man, at his son who was now her brother in all but blood, and at the bright future that lay before them all. She thought of the little girl polishing a silver frame she could never afford, a silent keeper of a secret. That secret had not destroyed a family, as she had feared. It had rebuilt one. It had saved 3 lives. She had learned from her great-grandfather that the greatest victory is the one you win without a fight. But she had discovered a deeper truth on her own. The greatest power in the world is not knowledge, or strategy, or wealth. It is the courage to see the humanity in others, and to build a bridge to it, no matter the cost. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.